Hi everyone, Sunphony Burn-Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Eminem album, Kamikaze. This is the new surprise album from top-selling rapper of all time, Detroit's own Eminem. An artist who honestly needs no introduction, but it is worth going over what exactly has brought us to this point right here. Truth be told, Eminem had a pretty rough 2017, and all because he dropped one of the worst albums of the year, easily the worst album of his career, Revival. A record that received industry-wide backlash from fans and critics alike. I know that I myself was pretty upset with the horrible guests and production, the excruciating choruses, and the obnoxious staccato flows Eminem would deliver in every track. Oh, and there's also Eminem's painfully cringy bars on tracks like Bad Husband and Offended, just to name a few. I do give it to Eminem that he does come up with some clever double entendres. He does have some pretty unique flows, and he does rap fast. I cannot take that away from him, but I think Eminem doesn't fully appreciate that these things alone don't make a good album. A hard truth I think he's kind of lost touch with since the release of some of his biggest and earliest albums like the Slim Shady and Marshall Mathers LPs. On those albums, Eminem was an underdog weirdo with a refreshing style, as well as a brutally dark and a cartoony sense of humor, and at times he would get really serious as well and go into some really traumatic territory like violence and abuse and bullying, addiction, and his own lack of self-control, his personal struggles with fatherhood. Eminem at one time was an unrepentant asshole whose rough upbringing gave him license to take his anger out on the ugly world that took him to the top of the charts. He was hip-hop's anti-hero, and his abrasive personality was something that you either loved him or hated him for. And most importantly, back in the day, I think Eminem actually cared how his tracks worked as songs, not just as platforms to complain on top of. Musically and topically, Eminem used to really have it together, but these days, not so much. Which brings us to Kamikaze. It's an album that in a lot of respects is merely a reaction to the negative reactions that Revival justifiably got. Now, of course, there are a handful of tracks on this album that do not work that angle. There are some relationship cuts on this record where Eminem continues to lay out his struggles with romance and picking out Mrs. Right and functioning normally in a healthy relationship, like on tracks such as Normal and the sister songs Good Guy and Nice Guy. These songs are maybe not as awful as some of the more lovesick moments off of Revival. The song Normal sounds like M on his Drake shit, with a super spacey beat and chill melodic flow. It's very laid back, it's kind of serene, but Eminem lyrically applies those usual themes of anger and violence and borderline psychosis that typically pepper a lot of his love songs. The singing is kind of weak, but I do admire the ambition of the track. The beat switch in the last leg is pretty great, and some of the stalking bars in the final moments of the song are pretty hilarious too. And the song Nice Guy with Jesse Reyes has a multifaceted hook, like a nice pre-chorus before it. It's got a bassy banger beat, this odd shouted suck my dick refrain right before Jesse pops in on top of these glamorous pianos. This whole section of the track feels almost Kanye-esque to me. Her performance feels as psychotic as some of Eminem's lyrics on the track do. Even though I don't really care for how short the song is cut off, I do think the song works as a concept piece about two people who should have never agreed to be in this very volatile relationship. But then we get a sudden transition into this romantic track, Good Guy, which takes a much more apologetic tone, and I don't know, it just seems like a weak change off to a more sappy sound, something that kind of reminds me of like that really awful Ed Sheeran cut that landed on Revival. I get what Eminem is trying to do here with the emotional flip of these two tracks and how they kind of mirror each other in a lot of ways, but I think the transition and the whole idea here could have been executed a lot better. And there's also the track Stepping Stone, where Eminem essentially apologizes to his former group D12. I like the personal angle, the heartfelt tone of the track, the performance from Eminem. on an emotional level is pretty good. It seems sincere, but it's not really a high point on the album, as the hook is a little rough, the beat seems a little underbaked like a lot of cuts off of Revival did, as there is this sudden rush of snares that fly in that guide us into the verses of the track that get kind of blown out, and they clip and they distort and they sound horrendous. Again, this is not the kind of production that you expect to be on an album from a top-selling artist, a platinum-selling artist. And what the hell is this ugly, completely unlistenable, jagged melodic flow backed up with these synth strings that Eminem hits us up with in the last leg of the song?
To my partners, I can't say how sorry I am. This is not how I planned for our story to end. I love all of you, man, but I can't be the guy.
That is the worst sounding flow I've heard this year. That is such a horrendous flow. Just because you have the technical ability to do something does not mean you should do it or that it sounds good. Unfortunately, this is a lesson I think Eminem has yet to learn. But for the most part, this apology song just feels like an extended excuse. Because it's not like Shady Records couldn't have backed D12 much in the same way that they did Slaughterhouse. And as Eminem explains on the hook, the whole motivation behind this song seems driven less by Eminem's feelings about the pain he might have caused people, and more by the awkwardness that he'll feel if he doesn't wipe the slate clean before his career hits rock bottom, and he might see some of the people who he hurt face to face. Which is kind of an awful reason to apologize for anything. I mean, throughout the song you say that you didn't mean to use D12 as a stepping stone, but all signs point to yes. And honestly, I don't really feel like this track is as deep or as meaningful or as helpful as legitimately putting an olive branch out there or finding some way to aid in the group's career at this point. But maybe Eminem just really doesn't have it in him to do anything other than just shrug in song and say, hey guys, I'm having a hard time charting myself at this point, okay? There's also the song Venom, the closer on this thing, and of course this song is going to be on the upcoming movie's soundtrack. That's just perfect. I can't really comment on this song outside of saying it has one of the ugliest choruses I've ever heard in Eminem's entire career. Venom, adrenaline, get 'em, ain't gonna know what hit 'em, Venom. How is this real life? How is this a real thing that a mainstream artist does on their song? The rest of the album, though, is pretty much Eminem getting confrontational with his critics, or this new wave of trap rappers that, in his opinion, aren't really up to snuff lyrically. They're not up to his technical ability, man. Though Eminem on this album does employ some trendier beats and producers and flows too. Though much of the time when he does this, it feels like he's trying to parody a more contemporary sound or just kind of show the audience, hey, I can do this too. Aren't I cool too? And in some ways I do think it makes the material and Eminem on this album a bit more palatable, but his consistently bitter and vengeful tone throughout a lot of the songs on this album kind of cancels that out, an attitude that is very much set by the opening track on this thing, The Ringer. Keep in mind this track and the entire album kicks off with Eminem muttering into the microphone, I feel like I want to punch the world in the fucking face right now. You're so dramatic. Yeah, this track is not as much a song as it is just Eminem ranting with a flow, responding to his critics with some pretty half-assed, lazy, and boring arguments like, I'm an artist, you guys aren't artists, you'll never be artists. You guys just want sliders. Revival is a porterhouse. It's too deep for you to get. If you don't get my music, you're retarded. I bet you guys would have liked my last album if it was auto-tuned. There's even a bar on the track where he says that media journalists can get a mouthful of flesh, and yes, I mean eating a penis. Yeah, dude, it's an Eminem album. We know you mean eating a penis. There's another bar on this track where he tries to beat his detractors to the inevitable critique of this album by saying, oh, well, why is he taking out the fact that his album sucks on us? Usually when you try to delegitimize the point of view of your haters by throwing their opinions out there before they do, you might try to exaggerate a flaw in their reasoning to point out how stupid that is. Really do or say anything to diffuse that argument, but yet Eminem doesn't do that. He just simply states that people are going to point out that he's essentially throwing a lyrical temper tantrum on this song because people didn't like his last record. which is true. You are throwing a temper tantrum on this track because you don't like the fact that people pointed out that your last album sucked. That's all true. It's all still true. You didn't make that any less legitimate an argument. Granted, the track does have some impressive flows and rhymes, but once again, I feel like what good things Eminem brings forward are canceled out by the sad bitterness of the song. It's really annoying, especially considering there was a time in Eminem's career when he either took criticism in stride or he responded to it in a smart way that seemed like it was kind of rolling off his back. The following track, The Greatest, is way more enjoyable, relatively speaking. M essentially wanting to show that he has more aggression and flow and lyrics than his contemporaries, so he just kind of puts it out there. He does his thing over a pretty catchy beat, a somewhat obnoxious hook on this thing, but I'll take it. It's definitely more likable than a lot of what else is on this thing. He continues to throw shots at other rappers and his detractors, but at least on this track he seems a lot less butthurt while doing it. He also brings some hilariously callous references to mass shooters and some nice rap god flows too. The song Lucky You, oddly enough, I found to be one of the better tracks in the track listing here, even if some people don't really care for the featured artist on this thing, Joyner Lucas. I think his flows on the track are top-notch. Some of his lyrics are pretty smart and funny. The beat's not too bad, but really the highlight, the crown jewel of the track is Eminem's verse, where it seems like he has a lyrical moment of clarity, admitting that he sold a lot of his artistry up the river to become more famous, more popular, and that he legitimately took an L for his bad album last year. A handful of bars stood out when he was making this point. I don't hate trap, and I don't want to seem mad, but in fact, where the old me at? The same cat who would take that feedback and aim back. I need that. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's what I've been saying. Where is that guy? Do you know where that guy is? Do you have his email or phone number? Is he coming back anytime soon? On the track Not Alike, Eminem and Royce da 5'9" hop on top of this Tay Keith beat that's very much in a style that Blockboy JB has popularized recently. The hook is also like an interpolation of the raindrop drop top bars from the Migos track Bad and Bougie. There are some worthwhile bars on the track. M and Royce have some pretty cool chemistry on the song, but for the most part, trying to fit their respective styles over this very contemporary sound without much in the way of an appreciation as to how exactly this whole trap thing works. It just kind of feels like they're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. The title track on the album, though, I dug pretty much. It seemed like a kookier, older version of Eminem revitalized, with some pretty hilarious visuals like riding through someone's cul-de-sac with his windows cracked, bumping their reference tracks. The beat very much matches the violent and comedic and zany tone of Eminem's lyrics. And I think the track also serves as a reminder of how far humor went to make Eminem's older material so much more palatable. Because honestly, these days, Eminem's humor is either not landing or it's just not there because he is way too angry and self-serious. And I actually presume that's because he's legitimately angry and taking himself way too seriously to get a lot of his points across effectively. The song Fall has a pretty chill, spaced out instrumental and a hidden secret feature from Justin Vernon of Bon Iver fame on the hook. It's honestly one of the better sounding songs on the entire record in terms of the instrumental and even Eminem's flow, but I feel like Eminem kind of ruins the potential of the song by throwing out some idiotic and horrendous bars at people who didn't really deserve his ire. For one, Joe Budden I think had some really legitimate criticisms of Eminem's album rollout and the album itself, and then with some of the dumbest bars in the entire song, he attacks people like Tyler the Creator and Earl, and I get that there are some new and contemporary artists that Eminem doesn't like, who are well deserving of criticisms that their music is dumb and it's shallow and it's meaningless, etc. But now you're just bitterly attacking young, talented artists who are making better projects than you right now. Eminem goes as far as to say, "Don't tell me about the culture. I inspired the Hobsons and the Logics." Yeah, dude, I don't know if I would retain bragging rights on that. On top of that, you consistently shit on these younger rappers for being materialistic and mumbly and so on and so forth and just rapping about their chains. Meanwhile, you help put on 50 Cent. Look, if you guys like 50 Cent, you like 50 Cent, and that's fine. I'm mostly just annoyed at this constant critique from Eminem that there's a lot of this new music out there and it's just not that deep. Meanwhile, 50 Cent's catalog isn't exactly profound or anything. Okay? Yeah, Kamikaze overall, it's not as bad as Revival. There is quite a bit of this record that I think is pretty listenable, a couple tracks that I actually feel are kind of good. But also there is a lot of blissfully ignorant and totally out of touch trash on this thing. A good chunk of it is pretty much unlistenable. It's pretty much a mixed bag with way more misses than hits, even if, again, there are a few spots where Eminem does improve a little bit and seems a bit more aware of his shortcomings and where he might need to go next in order to make his next project more likable. I'm feeling a light to decent 4 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Eminem, Kamikaze, forever.